Here to talk to you today about the pandemic reveal, American housing policy from 1920 to 2020, and its lasting impact on the Black community. The COVID-19 outbreak in America began in the spring of 2020, originated from New York City, and spread rapidly across the country. Um, what became apparent was that it was disproportionately affecting those in the Black community, exposing some issues that were already existing in the Black community. In particular, it was the fact that housing was not available at the same rate that it was to other communities. They had not enjoyed the support of the American government. The epidemic itself did not create this issue, but it exposed this issue on a greater level. So, starting in November of 1920, by a landslide vote, Warren G. Harding was selected as the President of the United States of America. Following the summer of 1919, which was a very, a time of great unrest in American politics. As war veterans were coming back, American cities were struggling on what the future of the cities would be. It was a transitional period. In 1922, the Commerce Department issued the State Zoning Enabling Act. What this did was created the framework at which cities could do land use and zoning moving forward, which led to the growth of what we all know now as suburbia. From the 1920s up until the 1960s, roughly 7 million African Americans moved from the southern states in America up to the northern cities, in particular New York, Chicago, Detroit, in particular, where they were moving for a better life to get away from the harsh realities of the Jim Crow South, where they, were second citizens. In 1934, the government established the FHA, an organization that was created to incentivize home ownership. It, practiced a policy, as we all know now, as redlining, which outlined certain areas that African Americans lived, and those areas would not receive funding. Here you can see a map which shows an example of specifically how they decided which areas would be African American communities and which ones were not African American communities. They would provide financing to those areas where African Americans did not live. This also affected insurance appraisals. Simultaneously, the FHA provided incentives to builders who created homes in what we now know as suburbia, right? So these new sections of town were being profitable to different parts of society that African Americans were left out of. This was sustained throughout the United States of America. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy issued an executive order saying that this must stop, that race-based discrimination in housing specifically was not to be supported by the federal government. His brother was also a big supporter of this effort. But it wasn't until 1968 where the federal government created rules that were actually enforceable. This act prohibited the discrimination of the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. This bill passed just days after the death of Martin Luther King. Some of the current issues in housing policies currently still don't address the decades of the African Americans being underserved. These communities were, proportionally affected in a negative way through redlining, which was, basically enforced by the American government. In those same communities, health conditions have deteriorated over the decades. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development was created in 1968 by Lyndon Johnson. FHA became a part of this department. FHA was, focused primarily still on home ownership, where HUD was focused largely on providing affordable housing and providing housing for those who need, which included the elderly as well as the low income and those with disabilities. So in many cities across America, we now have this signature look of these buildings where they place large populations of low income folks. Many of these buildings, when they were created segregated, where only white folks can live in these buildings and only black folks can live in these other buildings. Many of these over the years have really declined in quality. These, high density buildings have increased health issues throughout the decades. So this presentation wants to provide not only, what happened in the past, but I want to provide some solutions on what we can do moving forward using FHA as the vehicle to do so. We want to offer new solutions that will exceed diversity goals in different cities across America. The first solution is a new FHA loan program, a program that's directed specifically to African Americans to encourage homeownership throughout their community, as well as increasing the African American population in communities that are historically African American. I'm proposing a zero interest loan product. Another solution is to address HUD's issue, which is decades of really underfunded, underperforming buildings to really reevaluate the system. So reinvested in the current buildings, as well as creating some new low density solutions like the ones you see in the picture here. Also, they should look into reducing the density and demolishing existing unsafe buildings. I think at this point, we should no longer accept what's existing and what's provided. We need to provide new solutions now. HUD should be the vehicle at which that should be implemented, including reevaluating the voucher system. So, in closing, segregation was created and upheld through government implementation. So, I am saying today that the government must be the one to instill the new solutions moving forward. Um, but public and private parties can work together to implement these solutions. So, thank you.